The security guard planted himself in front of the iron gate like he owned the horizon behind him, and behind that gate was my grandfather's ranch. 200 acres my family had worked for 50 years, while this guy I had never seen in my life stared at a tablet and said very casually, "Sir, you are permanently banned from this property by order of the Cedar Hollow Preserve, HOA. I was holding the old brass key my grandfather gave me when I was 18, the one that used to open every lock on that ranch, and it felt ridiculous and kind of surreal to stand there in a suit, a corporate attorney who specializes in property law, hearing some security guard tell me I had no right to step onto my own family's dirt. I told him my grandfather was in the ICU, that this was his land, our land, that I grew up here, and the guard just shrugged, said, "Take it up with the president, or I'll have to call the sheriff," like he was talking about a parking ticket. And in that moment, I felt this mix of rage and disbelief, like, yeah, this is actually happening. To be honest, it didn't start at that gate. It started 2 days earlier when I woke up in my Denver apartment at 5:30 in the morning, heart racing like I'd been running in my sleep, the kind of cold sweat that makes you sit up before you even know why. And for a second, I could still see the dream as clearly as if I was standing in it. In the dream, my grandfather, Roy Mercer, was standing at a gate that didn't belong there. Black iron instead of our old wooden one, with rust running down the bars like dried blood. The pastures behind him dull and brown instead of green. And he looked at me with that serious, disappointed look he used to give me when I was a teenager about to make a dumb choice. And he said, "Jakey, you need to come home. Don't let them take what we built." And then the gate slammed between us, and I jolted awake with his voice still ringing in my head. I tried to shrug it off, told myself I was just feeling guilty, because it had been 8 years since I left Mason Creek for Denver. 8 years of missing holidays and silencing his calls with a, "I'll call him back later." That never happened, and I was still sitting on the edge of the bed when my phone lit up with a missed call from an Oklahoma number I didn't recognize. Then immediately rang again. The woman on the line sounded like every nurse I've ever heard deliver bad news. Way too calm, way too professional for what she was saying. And she told me my grandfather had suffered a massive stroke, that he was in a medically induced coma, that I should come as soon as I could, and I remember staring at the wall and thinking that this was the moment I had been unconsciously avoiding for years. Within an hour, I had canceled my meetings, thrown half my closet into a duffel, and was driving a rental car away from the airport toward the part of Oklahoma where the roads get narrower and the sky gets bigger past the feed store and the little white church and the gas station that still had the same flickering sign, only now mixed in with the old memories, were these brand new signs that felt like they didn't belong on that road at all. "Welcome to Cedar Hollow Preserve. Private community." One sign said all polished wood and fancy lettering. Then another, "Residents and authorized guests only." Then speed limit signs with a little HOA logo at the bottom, like a stamp of ownership. And as I drove past fields where I used to ride in the back of my granddad's truck, all I could think was, since when does an HOA logo get to claim my whole childhood? At the hospital, the ICU smelled like disinfectant, and burnt coffee, and fear, and my grandfather, the man who used to throw hay bales like they were empty boxes, and who always beat the sun up in the morning, looked impossibly small under all those tubes and blinking lights, his skin gray, his chest rising in shallow little movements like the machines were doing most of the work. I took his hand, rough and calloused even now, and started talking, telling him I was sorry. I stayed away, sorry. I chose conference rooms over fence lines, and I don't know if he could hear me, but I said it anyway because I needed it out of my chest. A nurse came in and checked his vitals, then handed me a clear plastic bag with his personal stuff in it, and said, "These were with him when he came in, and inside were his wallet, his key ring, and a thick envelope with a logo I was already starting to recognize from those signs outside. Cedar Hollow Preserve HOA. And across the front, in bold letters, it said, "Final notice. Access revoked." I opened it standing right there by his bed, and what I read made my stomach twist in that slow, cold way that's worse than sudden anger, because it wasn't just rude, it was calculated. According to that letter, my grandfather was officially banned from all HOA-controlled property, which conveniently included the land he had paid off decades ago for repeated violations of aesthetic and use standards that sounded like they had been written by someone who had never stepped in mud in their life. Things like unauthorized agricultural equipment visible from roadway and non-compliant exterior structures, which is HOA language for "we don't like how your barn looks," and livestock activity inconsistent with community character, which is wild considering that the community character before them was literally ranching. The letter threatened trespass charges if he crossed onto HOA grounds again, and the date on it was 3 weeks before his stroke. So while his brain was slowly betraying him, they were already legally erasing him from his own land. And that, you know what I mean? That hit different. The lawyer part of my brain kicked on. Even while the grandson. Part of me just wanted to sit there and hold his hand, because something about the timing and the tone smelled like more than just nosy neighbors. So the next morning, after a sleepless night at a motel off the highway, I drove to the county courthouse instead of straight back to the ranch. The county clerk still remembered me as Roy's boy who went off to big city law, and when I asked for any document filed in the last 6 months with Mercer on it, she disappeared into the back and came out with a stack of copies thick enough to rebuild the barn with, and right at the top was the first punch in the gut. It was a voluntary annexation agreement, which is a fancy way of saying paper where you supposedly agree to let the HOA's rules take over your property. And it said that my grandfather, Roy Mercer, had willingly placed his land under the authority of Cedar Hollow Preserve HOA, signing away decades of independence for the benefits of community oversight. And the signature at the bottom looked close enough to his that a tired clerk would probably not question it. But the date on that signature was the exact day. The doctor said he collapsed in his kitchen and was rushed to the hospital. Underneath that was an amended deed transferring Mercer Ranch to something called Harrow Community Trust. Also dated during his hospitalization, same neat, smooth signature. And that's when I leaned closer and noticed the detail only someone who's watched this man sign Christmas cards for decades would see. My grandfather always signed his name with a quirky little hook in the capital R. A double downstroke he picked up from a nun in Catholic school, and it was always there in every check, every birthday card, every note on the fridge. But on these legal documents, that hook was gone. The line, too clean, too mechanical. And a stranger probably would not have cared, but I looked at it and thought, that's not his hand. And yeah, that happened. I left the clerk's office and drove straight to the local bank branch, where he had kept his money since before I was born. The one with the faded mural of wheat fields on the wall, and sat down with the branch manager, who pulled up his account history, and immediately frowned when she saw the recent transactions. There were 3 cash withdrawals for $50,000, each in the last 2 months, all in person, totaling $150,000, while he had been lying in a hospital bed, unable to sign his own name. And when I asked, "How is that even possible?" she scrolled a little more, sighed, and said, We have a durable power of attorney on file executed 8 weeks ago naming a Denise Harrow as his representative. That name sat in my chest like a rock because I'd already seen Harrow on that trust document, and my grandfather never once mentioned any Harrow at Sunday dinner. I called my dad. After that, the call we had both avoided for nearly a decade, and he answered on the third ring with that tired defensive anger that happens when people are mad at themselves as much as they're mad at you, saying, "So now you show up," and I let him have that moment, and then I told him what I'd found. The forged signatures, the withdrawals, the letter banning Granddad from his own property, and I asked him if he knew who Denise Harrow was. He got quiet in a way that scared me more than if he had yelled. Then he told me there had been a woman. Nice car. Perfect hair showed up months back. Offered my grandfather life-changing money for the ranch. And when he laughed in her face and showed her the door, things started happening. Letters about code violations and unapproved structures. Trucks idling just off the property line at night with their headlights on. The mailbox knocked down twice county inspectors, suddenly very interested in his well and his septic system. My dad said, I thought he was just being stubborn. Like always, I didn't know it would go this far, and he admitted he felt outgunned, that she seemed connected to people at the county and the sheriff's office, and he was just a retired mechanic. And what was he supposed to do against that? The truth is, I understood that feeling more than I wanted to admit. But I also knew that if anyone was built for this exact kind of fight, it was me, the kid who left to learn the rules of that game. That night, sitting in a motel room with printouts spread all over the bed, I realized that if I went through proper channels, we might be in court for months while my grandfather's life ran on ICU time. And I kept thinking about that floor, safe in his bedroom closet, where he kept every important paper he ever had. And the fact that if Denise had already forged deeds and drained bank accounts, she had probably gone through that safe too. But my grandfather was not stupid, and I knew he believed in hiding a backup. So I did something I'm not proud of on paper, but I can't honestly say I wouldn't do it again. I drove out to the ranch at night, not to the front gate with the guard and the cameras, but to the old back fence line, where we used to slip through as kids to go frog gigging, brought bolt cutters, parked the truck in a tree line, and walked in with my heartbeat loud in my ears, feeling like a criminal on land, where I learned how to walk. The house looked wrong. Even in the dark, the front door hanging crooked, the porch light shattered, and when I stepped inside, it was like someone had shaken the whole place upside down. Drawers dumped couch cushions, sliced cabinet doors, ripped off picture frames, smashed glass, crunching under my boots. In the bedroom closet, the panel hiding the safe was wide open, and the safe door swung empty, which told me two things at once: I was late, and they were scared enough of my grandfather to tear apart every inch of his home. I stood there for a minute, hand on the empty safe, feeling that awful sinking feeling. Then I remembered something my grandmother showed me when I was 9, when we were dusting the living room, and she winked and said, "Every woman needs a hiding place the men don't know about," and pulled out their wedding photo from the top of an ugly old oak cabinet and popped open a hidden compartment behind it. I ran back to that cabinet now lying on its side, found the picture face down in broken glass, pressed the tiny latch she'd shown me, and the panel clicked open to reveal a little plastic bag with a USB drive inside. Nothing else. I slipped it into the lining of my jacket just as bright white light flooded the room, and a siren chirped outside, and a very familiar voice on a loudspeaker yelled, "Sheriff's Department, come out with your hands up!" Walking out of your grandparents' front door with your hands over your head while 3 patrol cars sit in the driveway and deputies point guns past you, is a special kind of humiliating. And when I saw who was standing between those cars, not in a uniform, but in a perfect slate gray suit and pearl earrings, arms folded watching, that humiliation lit up into anger so hot, it actually felt calm. Denise Harrow looked exactly like the type of person who sues over the shade of your mailbox. Sharp little smile, perfect blowout eyes that said she was used to getting what she wanted. And when the deputy read me my charges and clicked cold metal around my wrists, she stepped close enough that only I could hear and said, "I warned your grandfather what would happen if he kept fighting progress. Stubbornness really does run in your family." I looked at her and said, "So does not backing down," and let them put me in the back of the car. County jail is fluorescent lights and boredom and humiliation. And a few hours later, they sat me in a plastic chair in a visitation room, hands still cuffed, and brought Denise in like this was a business meeting she was generously attending. She sat down with perfect posture, folded her hands, and said, "I'm going to give you a chance to walk away with something, Mr. Mercer. I drop the charges, you sign a non-disclosure agreement. I pay you double what that dusty ranch is worth, wired straight to you, and you go back to Denver. Or we can drag this through court. You get yourself a record, maybe a bar complaint, and at the end of it, nothing changes. Your call." I let her finish. Then I asked her what kind of person pays double the market value for land. She claims she already owns free and clear, and she smiled a little too fast and said, "Complications are expensive, and right now you're a complication." And I realized she had gotten used to people folding when she brought money and lawyers into the room. So I leaned in, looked at her in the eye, and told her about the details she had missed, the dates on the forged documents that matched the medical records of my grandfather being unconscious. The little hook in his capital R that her forger didn't know how to fake the power of attorney executed while he was sedated. And the fact that I had already called someone in a dark blue jacket with 3 big letters on the back who didn't work for our county or her friends at the courthouse. And I watched something tighten in her face, a little crack in the confident mask. Because for the first time, someone who understood the paperwork was not on her payroll. I got bailed out not long after, thanks to a colleague who drove down from Denver, and the next morning I walked into an office in Oklahoma City with no windows and a seal on the wall that said United States, and handed that USB drive to a federal agent who had the tired eyes of someone who had seen this same pattern 100 times. On that drive were recordings of phone calls where Denise's voice was very clearly threatening my grandfather with unfortunate accidents on isolated properties, a handwritten log of every bogus fine, and late-night visit photos of trucks parked just off the property line at 2 a.m. Dates that lined up with the letters and the county filings. And the agent sat back in her chair, looked at me and said, "We've been trying to nail her on real estate fraud and elder abuse for 2 years, but this is what we were missing." That was the twist for me, realizing my family wasn't the first and wouldn't have been the last that to her. We were just a number in a spreadsheet, part of a pattern of shaking down older landowners until they sold or died. And I remember thinking, if I walk away now, I'm not just letting her steal from us, I'm letting her keep that whole machine running. 2 days later, I stood at the back of a big white event tent, pitched on land that used to be 3 different family farms, watching Denise on stage with a microphone in her hand, smiling for local news cameras, talking about revitalizing the area with Cedar Hollow Resort, while county commissioners and bankers and realtors clapped like this was the best thing that had ever happened to the town. and I felt this weird mix of nausea and satisfaction because I knew what was about to happen. Right in the middle of her speech, black SUVs rolled up, and agents in those dark blue jackets walked straight down the center aisle. The crowd parted around them, and the lead agent stepped onto the stage. Gently took the microphone out of Denise's hand and said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Denise Harrow, you are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, forgery, and multiple counts of elder abuse," and the silence in that tent was louder than any applause. Denise tried to do the whole, "This is a misunderstanding. I have powerful friends. Do you know who I am?" routine, while they turned her around and cuffed her hands behind her back, and the agent calmly read her rights like she'd done this 100 times. And as they walked her off the stage and past the people she used to impress, she saw me standing at the back. For half a second, all the polish dropped out of her face, and I saw the real emotion. Not anger, not even hate, just fear, the realization that the game she'd been running for years finally had consequences, and I didn't say anything clever or dramatic. I just met her eyes and let her see that I was still standing there, that she had not scared us off our own land. The legal stuff after that was a blur of hearings and signatures and orders. But the important parts are simple enough to say out loud. The HOA got dissolved. The fraudulent deeds got voided. The trust got unwound. The bank fraud got charged. Other families came out of the woodwork with stories that sounded way too much like ours. And one quiet afternoon, a federal judge's order hit the county record, saying Mercer Ranch was once again held by the Mercer family. No HOA strings attached. A few weeks later, I drove out to the property alone and parked in front of a simple metal gate where the big iron monster used to stand, the fancy HOA sign already gone, leaving 2 bare posts and a patch of dead grass. And I got out and leaned on the hood and just looked at it all. The house that needed new shingles, the fence line that sagged in too many places, the pasture that had tire tracks where it shouldn't, but also the same sky, the same tree line, the same wind in the grass. I remembered as a kid, I thought about my granddad in rehab, learning how to walk with a cane. My dad finally admitting he was proud of me, not because I left, but because I came back and did something with what I learned. And I thought about that security guard at the beginning of this mess, telling me I was banned from my own home, and how now, somewhere far away, the woman who gave that order was staring at a very different kind of gate. I'm not going to pretend the story ends with some perfect montage of sunsets and family barbecues. Life is messier than that, and I still split my time between an office in Denver and a beat-up kitchen table in Mason Creek, still figuring out if I'm supposed to be a rancher or a lawyer or something in between. But I can tell you this, the land is ours again. My grandfather got to roll out there in a wheelchair and see his fields without HOA signs stuck in them. And that gate opens. When we decide, it opens, not when some board votes on it. So I want to ask you, because I know everybody has an opinion about this kind of thing, did I cross a line breaking into my own family's house to grab that USB? Or was that the only way to fight back in a game that was already rigged? And what do you think about HOAs anyway? Are they necessary to keep neighborhoods from falling apart? Or are they just legally sanctioned bullying for people with nothing better to do than count how many weeds are in your yard? You know what I mean. If you've ever had a landlord, or an HOA, or a boss, or anyone with a little bit of power use paperwork and threats to try and take something that felt like it was yours, I want to hear about it in the comments. Tell me if you think I went too far, or not far enough hit. Like if this hit a nerve for you, share it with that one friend who has a horror story about a petty HOA letter on their fridge And subscribe if you want more stories where regular people push back when the system leans too hard on them. Because as I learned at that gate, sometimes the only way to stop a bully with a rule book is to know the rules better than they do and refuse to step aside.